All right, let's get into this final story. So this is out of Colorado State University, Warren College of Natural Resources. Apex predators, not a quick fix to restoring ecosystems. 20-year study of Colorado State University finds. So I do want to give a little bit of kind of oversight as to kind of what this study is really going over, kind of the bigger issue that they're really looking to cover. So, the study itself gets into kind of some weedy stuff, into some really, stuff that seems really unrelated to kind of what that title suggests. So basically what they're looking at is there's a significant, understanding or belief that, adding, predators like wolves, bears, mountain lions back to a landscape is a tropic cascade effect, where basically by adding these predators back onto the landscape, it's going to fix all the issues, of the landscape. It's kind of like a rebalancing, and kind of fix the whole environment, fix all the ecosystem by just putting them back on the landscape and letting them do what they do. Everything will go back to the way it was when they were on the landscape. That's not necessarily the case of what this study is showing. This study itself challenges the commonly held belief that reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park restored the ecosystem degraded by their absence. And this is, this study, or this designed type of experiment, is the longest conducted ever in regards to the Yellowstone. So it's, again, a 20-year study. So there's a ton of data that they were able to collect and look at kind of a long-term or extended period of time of with these wolves being reintroduced onto the landscape. So let's get into the story itself. So a Colorado State University experiment spanning more than 2 decades was found the removal of apex predators from an ecosystem that can create lasting changes are not reversed after they return, at least not for a very long time. So again, looking at that 20-year study, they didn't see any significant change in that regard. Study founded by the National Science Foundation and published challenges the commonly held belief that reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park Service restored ecosystems degraded by their absence. CSU's Warren College Natural Resources examined the effects of 3 apex predator carnivores at the top of the food chain not preyed on by other animals in Yellowstone. Depleted populations of cougars, grizzly bears naturally recovered about the same time where wolves were reintroduced to the park in 1995. The absence of these predators for nearly a century transformed the food web and landscape. Yellowstone's northern range shifted from a willow and aspen stand along streams with beaver activity to grasslands due to intensive browsing by elk. Widespread change stabilized into an alternative ecological state that resisted return to previous conditions once carnivores were restored. This designed experiment, conducted in Yellowstone, is the longest of its kind and adds evidence supporting the theory that degradation of ecosystems may not be reversed when harmful stressors were mitigated. When you disturb an ecosystem by changing the makeup of the food web, it can lead to lasting changes that are not quickly fixed, says Hobbs, lead author and professor with the Department of Ecological Science and Sustainability and the Natural Resources Ecological Laboratory. We can't rule out the possibility that the ecosystems will be restored over the next 40 years as a result of returned apex predators. All we can be sure of is that is what observable now. The ecosystem has not responded dramatically to the restored food web. They go on to explain this a little bit, kind of break down kind of what the conclusion. So they go on to say, what can Colorado learn from Yellowstone? Colorado Parks and Wildlife introduced 10 wolves to the state, 18 to 22, with plans to bring in more coming years. Wolves were eradicated in the state in the mid-1940s. May hold lessons about the restored apex predator's effect on the ecosystem. But Hobbs said the environment degradation resulting from Yellowstone's policy not to call elk was never replicated in Colorado. Unlike Yellowstone, Colorado's landscapes have not experienced widespread excessive grazing or browsing from elk. The state has done a good job of managing elk populations using hunting. So this brings up another very good topic about the difference between the Park Service, that no animals are harvested or managed in any way in regards to calling any type of populations of any animals, whereas the rest of the state in Colorado, they manage, their game agencies manage populations. And again, you can see that they're noting that there's not excessive browse because they're managing the elk herd with hunting as a supplement as well. Hobbs and Cooper said there are many good reasons to restore wolves, but don't expect them to cause immediate ecological or ecosystem improvements. Our work supports the fact that wolves are important components of the ecosystem, and research science immersed the Department of Forest and Rangeland Stewardship. They will have some ecosystem benefits by reducing some large herbivores populations. Over the next hundreds of years, they'll have a greater role in regulating some of ecological processes that we've been studying. So, and then they get in kind of the crux of kind of why they focus on the willows and aspen trees as kind of their benchmark or marker of change. So wolves and cougars, so what they go on to say, what do willows have to do with wolves? Wolves and cougars were wiped out in Yellowstone in the 1920s without apex predators or human hunters to control their population. Elk fed on willows along small streams, Yellowstone's northern range, depleting beavers' food supply and building materials that caused them to abandon the streams in favor of more suitable areas. Historical beavers and willows relied on each other to thrive. Flooding caused by beaver dams created favorable soil moisture conditions for willows, and the willows provide food and dam material for beavers. Without beavers' engineered flooding, small streams in northern range cut deeper into the landscape, disconnecting roots of willows from groundwater. Willows never recovered their former height and density. Following the reintroduction of wolves in the park in 1995, as cougars and grizzly populations were rebounding on their own, the elk population dropped from both predation and hunting by humans along park borders. However, overbrowsing of woody food sources has not declined proportionally. As the number of elk have decreased, bison herds have increased. Yellowstone carnivores typically don't prey on bison because of their large size and makes them dangerous. But I did end up, that's funny that they bring that up, because I did see another article in regards to the fact that because of the depleted elk herds in Yellowstone, that some of the wolf packs are getting larger and they are taking on bison. They go on long-term experiment. In 2001, began the experiment, gauged whether Yellowstone ecosystem would recover due to restoration of apex predators. They established 4 study areas in the northern park's range, fenced off 8 plots and prevent browsing, constructed simulated beaver dams in some fenced and non-fenced plots, raised the water table. They also left controlled areas unaltered. In 2009, they added 21 more controlled plots to ensure the results of their experiment were representative of the landscape. If predators regulated the elk population, preventing them from cutting down willows, the landscape would hypothetically return to its previous state. Instead, the willows remained short in controlled plots, while the fenced sites where stimulated dams showed dramatic recovery. So again, just like any other experiment, they had their control set up as well as their experimental area, and it showed that even though the elk populations and the wolf populations with that dynamic, they didn't note any significant change. You remove those factors and they saw a dramatic difference in those results. Willows grew more than 3 times taller in the fenced dammed areas than in the control plots, indicating the importance of groundwater access in addition to mitigation of browsing. By manipulating the factor of time, browsing At many sites for a long time, the researchers were able to show that carnivores were not causing landscape restoration. We have learned from science that things could be way more complicated, as they usually are. Our results show well supported by our result is well supported by ecological theory and empirical results from over the world. Distributed food webs can cause resistant changes in ecosystems. Research in Yellowstone is common, but this study is rare in its manipulation of the landscape and its distribution. Hobbs and Cooper worked closely with park management and biologists, including Yellowstone National Park senior wildlife biologist Daniel Stoller, to answer questions relative to the park's needs and share results to help guide park policy. Its research contributes greatly to the understanding of Yellowstone by teasing out the degree of which complex links of food web affect ecosystems under native species recovery. Importantly, it is among the few published studies to date the Yellowstone ecosystem that highlight that not just wolves, but multiple predator species skeletons have contributed to changes in elk abundance. At this point, ramifications of how we evaluate how complex ecosystems respond to carnivores, presence and absence. He continues long-term research conducted by the team also highlighted the value of national parks to help us understand ecological processes to better protect ecosystems. We should not only cherish the national resources of the parks they protect, preserve, people allowed to enjoy because they are able to place where well-designed science can evaluate or understand its complexity. All right. So if you were able to follow all that, again, basically the idea was, there's by those who are, environmentalists or animal, protectionists that, are against hunting and that type of thing, or that are, extreme in regards to protection of wolves. All right, I wouldn't even say protection of non-management practices, I guess I would say, of wolves, bears, and mountain lions. There's go to a lot of their different websites or read articles from those groups, and they will very strongly suggest that simply adding these predators back onto the landscape, letting them do what they do, will fix everything. Again, that tropic cascade effect, that just by putting them back on the landscape will right all the wrongs. Again, things, this study really highlights that things are much more complicated than that. Yes, human interaction, depleting a lot of these predators off the landscape, yes, had a significant impact. But just simply putting them back on the landscape is not going to, put everything, flip the coin and put everything back. You can't really go back to that anymore because of the changes of, the environment, the human interaction, we have expanded, the country with, human populations, that you have to take that in consideration. And again, simply by adding the predators doesn't mean that, the beavers are going to come back to the stream in this instance and, put everything back. I mean, it's going to be more of a, complex restoration process. If you wanted to turn it back to what it was, you have to manipulate a lot of the populations of a lot of animals to be able to get that balance back, or, that desired goal to try to get that balance back. So that's why, again, you don't want to have an influx of, one thing or the other. In this instance, if, the goal was, or if they had a project to, do a restoration project, it almost sounds like, okay, so now you need to, manage those streams in areas where the willows are, again, fence them off some manner, bring beavers onto the landscape, let them, build dams undisturbed where they're not going to be, again, preyed upon, keep the elk away from those streams and willows. That way they can grow up, that way they can reestablish. And then maybe you might be able to get the achieved goal. But again, it's not going to be right away. And again, with those predators, I know know, there's a lot of the apex predators that love to prey on beaver as well. So now you got, additional food source. Things are going to get complicated. But again, just wanted to highlight this, that again, managing apex predators, like, yes, it is great to have them on the landscape. I think they should be on the landscape, but they need to be managed just like any other species and regulated to make sure that there's no imbalances or, again, issues that come up. Some people may not want to go agree with this, but we have to kind of decide that, are we part of nature or above it, or a combination of both. When it comes to managing populations, are we only going to do it part way, or are we going to manage all populations?